Sometimes it's very difficult to see that you're not the victim. I'm doing the workbook lessons of the course. I don't think I'm exactly on, but I'm very close to where it would be if you started the first year. So my lesson for today, and I thought it was interesting in terms of what he was just saying, my lesson for today is 288, let me forget my brother's past. That's a big step sometimes. And some of the lessons are tough lessons, but this is a lesson you can do. Let me forget my brother's past, right? Okay. Zhao. Hold it close. Right here. Wait, let's be sure you're on. You're not on. Okay.
It's an honor to share my little story. Here's my story. My story started as far back as I can remember. I was born disconnected from the world and my body. Eating, sleeping, walking were very hard to understand for me. It took a long time to adjust myself in this world, to live like a human being. I saw everything distorted, ugly, and meaningless. I knew there was something missing, and I must find it. My home had a rich library which contained many philosophical and Buddhist books. These texts provided me the chance to read and explore. Before the age of 14, I slept no more than 4 hours a night. At times, I could not sleep at all for 1 or 2 months. Several times, I would faint on the road and or would spit up blood. I was dying. Often people say that I was lucky to have the chance to know spirituality at this young age. I never thought that way. I paid my dues. I have been working on this diligently. I wrote dozens of notebooks to dig into every thought to see what was inside. I never hid my thoughts from myself, no matter how ugly they were. This is still my practice. But be aware when you talk about your thoughts. You don't want to speak them. You don't have to speak them out loud. You don't want to do anything that will cause fear. This journey finally led me to a stage of effortlessness, which is actually our natural state. However, to be effortless, I needed to put forth a lot of effort and willingness to see through the veils of ego. I said to myself, find the meaning of life or die. The reason I was so radical was because I felt I was lifeless, like a living dead. I hated that. At the age of 14, after 7 years of intensive reading and reflection to find the answers and failing, I decided to commit suicide on my bed. I said to myself, since there's no meaning to life or to the world, then there's no difference between being alive or dead. Then suddenly the whole world disappeared. Myself disappeared. I felt I had melted into God, the supreme good, the most beautiful, peaceful, joyful state I never imagined. I realized that I had been looking for answers in the world, looking for the answer in a wrong place. The answers were not outside in the world. This answer was inside. This is the answer I had always been looking for. This was the supreme good. The next 3 days, I started seeing everything as the absolute presence of God. Before this experience, I hated dog, uh, flies, people arguing and hurting each other. But now all these things turned into God's shining presence. I then started to think of an incomprehensible mystery that often confused me. In the Bible, when Jesus was about to be executed, he said, "Forgive them. They know not what they do." I now understand that God sees that people killing each other is no more than a little game. I knew that Jesus felt the same. I'm not my body. What kind of torture you do upon my body will never influence my true being. To have this attitude, of course, it's great. To protect your safety and health, it's also wise. However, sometimes inevitably things happen that do damage to our bodies. Do not be too sad for that. Our bodies are just tools. It's our choice to whether to use them to live out of love or kill each other. 3 days later, I came back to Earth. My human body could not stay in that state for a long time. It burns up everything, including the body. But the undisturbed peace stays. Curiously, shortly after the experience, I found A Course in Miracles, The Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard, and books by Atya Shanti. I did not know the contents of the books. I just knew I needed them. I was not willing to use the word enlightenment for a long time. I was not willing to say who is enlightened or not. Often people do not believe a young person can have an awakening experience. When I said I had such an experience, often they would no longer speak to me or say that I was arrogant to say such a thing. The other reason is people often abuse the word enlightenment, saying that they experience being one with a river, for example, or communicating with the dead. Those are supernatural experiences, but not awakening experiences. An awakening experience is experiencing the eternal oneness endlessly. It's actually unspeakable because of the limited vision that we have unless we experience it. You experience being the same with God in each and every aspect. Recently, I've decided not to be bothered by the word enlightenment regarding my experiences because everyone seems to understand it differently. In the end, words are just words. Words mean different things to different people. If I say God is a pile of dung, I'm not wrong, but not many people will agree with my words. The only testing standard comes from your heart. Check your heart to see if your peace is still undisturbed. But we do not know the feeling of someone else's heart. Each of us has free will, and none can judge the heart of another. Immediately after my awakening experience, I wrote, "I am God, I am who I am." I wrote that instantaneously. I shocked myself. I was shocked by my arrogance, but I could not help myself. 3 days later, I was writing nothingness completely, again and again. It was like I could not control my hands and something was leaking through me. Nothingness is a very helpful concept. I realized that God was the only thing I can never get rid of, even when I am not aware of its presence. It's still here. God did not hide himself from me. I had been holding concepts which didn't allow me to experience God's presence. Concepts are the ego's closest. A part deep inside of all of us knows the bodies are not us. When all concepts die, the ego dies. That is the true death, the death's death. It's even deeper than your body's death. That's why Jesus said that you must die before your body dies. That's why even the concept of God can be dangerous. You can lose all your money, your lovers may die. Everything in the material world is changing. Yet, no matter what you do, you just cannot get rid of God. That is the only thing does not change. It's your truth. Let your heart be empty and humble to see God's presence. I know some people are atheists. It does not matter. I can tell you a truth. God himself does not know his name is God. That's why you can call it anything you like. But all experiences of God are absolutely the same. God itself is being experienced by itself. There's no God but God. I also want to clarify that enlightenment is a constant state, not an instant experience. The experience is an encouragement that keeps us striving for it. To stay there needs a constant willingness to surrender. Say this to God, I will what you will. The question for you should always be, am I living out God absolutely, right now, right here, without any compromise? After the awakening experience, you will have to bring this attitude to the world until you forgive all that is unforgiven. A Course in Miracles says that the meaning of our earthly lives is removing the blocks we set to the awareness of love's presence. It's like peeling an onion, one layer at a time. It feels sometimes we are getting nowhere and doing repeated things. But when we peel the final layer, it disappears. Every time we peel another layer through forgiveness, it's a holy instant that lifts us closer to God. Keep peeling until you see God's face.
So this is quite an experience. All these kinds of experiences are doors and windows which can give us tremendous amount of insight. I'm working on a book right now on mysticism in A Course in Miracles, where I compare the insights of the different mystics, over 200, to the teachings of the Course. The Course is really a profound mystical document, unlike any other mystical document that has ever crossed the face of planet Earth. There's some wonderful things and some deep insights that people have had, but nothing has ever put it together in a package like the Course in Miracles, which becomes a guidebook for us to follow, especially with the workbook lessons, how we can open up to this experience. One of the quotes that we're going to have here from Ken Wapnick in a minute is, it says, it should really come gently. You'll notice that Zhao's experience really came as a result of a crash and burn experience. And by that I mean she decides to kill herself, right? I mean, it's the world is insane. Anybody get the feeling that the world is insane? Anything lately causing anybody to feel that way? But I would kind of remind you a bit, as crazy as it is and as mad as it is and as cartoonish as it is, as Alice in Wonderlandish as it is, keep in mind what it would have been like if you'd been in, say, Germany 70 years ago at this time. That would have been hell. I mean, hell on earth. I mean, so this is maybe very, very strange. And weird what's going on, but it's not that same kind of hell. All right, so remember that. How did that happen? Oh, you did it? I'm sorry. All right, we're not doing this yet. Okay. Let's talk about Zhao's experience. Okay. First, let me tell you about another experience. This is not a mystical experience, but a fellow named Harding, who was a professor at Oxford University back in the 1980s. He was actually a zoologist, but he got fascinated by studying mystical experiences as he studied evolution, because it became clear to him that there had to be something that went beyond the human, right? Like we talk about angels, or we talk about other dimensions. The Course is telling us that there's a whole world, right, which has nothing to do with this world. That this is as Brad was saying a while ago, this is a dream world. It's very much of a dream world. This is an Alice in Wonderland world, and we're making up this whole thing. I mean, you are, I am, collectively, we're doing it together, and there's no reason to allow what's happening to cause us to go crazy, because it's, you know, what you want to be, I think, is sort of a witness. You just kind of want to witness. You just kind of see it, but don't, you know, the whole, one of Ken Wapnick's favorite lines was, stay out of the sandbox. You know, just stay out of the sandbox. Just don't get in there and start throwing, I mean, maybe it's fun in some way, but really it's insanity if you take it too seriously. So the idea, you know, don't take any of this stuff too seriously. By the way, I just wrote an article for Miracles Magazine for the November-December issue. I wrote two, but Fran said she needed a short article, so I wrote a short article that's called Hubris Precedes Nemesis, which is actually always the case, right? Pride cometh before the fall. We can, you know, use a lot of lines like that. The man who is regarded as the world's leading expert on Hitler, wrote two books about Hitler. The first book was called Hubris. The second book was called Nemesis. Okay? So hubris always leads to nemesis. So that's just, we're talking about another perspective. Back to Harding. So Harding put this ad, now this is pre-PC. So this is back in the 80s, in a paper in London, and he let it run for a long time. And he said, I'm studying mystical experiences. If you've ever had a mystical experience, would you write it down and send it in? I'm collecting these descriptions. Well, he got thousands of them. His website still exists. If you've had a mystical experience, you can go on there, write down your own, and add it to another many, many thousands. And it's not just his, but there's a whole institute which is involved just in studying mystical experiences, which you can read about online. So they cataloged all these mystical experiences in terms of how did the experience, what brought on the experience? That was the question, right? And surprisingly, the number one stimulant was a crash and burn experience. Number one is crash and burn, right? So it's the thought of committing suicide. It's where the world falls apart. It's everything is so crazy you don't even want to be here. I mean, you don't want to be here in this world, even participating in it. So, or it could be the death of a loved one, somebody very, very close to you. It could be a diagnosis of severe illness. It could be a lot of things that it just causes the world to come to a complete halt, stop. So what happened with Zhao is that this happened. But it's interesting that even when she was very young, that she was already having this sense, well, let's start how this starts up. I was born disconnected from the world and the body. Eating, sleeping, walking were all hard for me to understand. It's actually difficult being in a body. You know, given, you know, actually let me use this clicker here for a minute, if I can identify what to do with the clicker. Oh, here it is in my pocket. Let's go for here. The The world you seem to live in is not home to you. And somewhere in your mind, you know that this is true. See, this is basic to understanding the Course, right? And how many of you don't feel this already? I mean, you, right? The world you seem to live in. That's why it has a kind of cartoonish, film-like, movie quality dream. And the best line is a dream. It's really a dream that's got you, and again, it's your dream. This is not reality, right? And somewhere in your mind, you know that this is true. Anybody want to disagree with that last line? Okay, so we all agree with that last line. Somewhere in your mind, you know that this is true. You know this isn't it. This is not heaven. This is not God's kingdom, right? And let's go on. A memory of home keeps haunting you. That's what you're here for. I mean, that's why you're sitting here in this room or watching this on YouTube or whatever you're doing, because there's this it haunts you. You know, what was that old thing? If that's all there is, remember the Peggy Lee, the song from 1969, I think it was, right? If that's all there is, then let's keep dancing, right? Well, the Course is saying this is not it at all. This is just a little glimpse and also a trap. I mean, the trap is the ego, the trap is the body, the body is the ego's chosen home. The main trap is the ego. The main trap is the thought that it's possible to think a thought outside of the mind of God. You cannot do it, but you can try to do it. And it's trying to do it that's given rise to this whole world and every aspect of it. And we share this attempt with billions and billions of other people, right? There are very few really enlightened folks walking around. And for those that are, they're probably hush-hush. I mean, they don't want to, they'll live in peace without trying to, and with a proper perspective, without trying to change things even, right? Okay. Look at one of the things that Zhao said, where she talked about, it's on, if you got the booklet, it's on page 2, on the second page. 3 days later I came back to Earth, okay? 3 days later I came back to Earth. My human body could not stay in that state a long time. It burns up everything, including the body. Now, I put this in this format for and bolded that sentence on purpose because you've maybe heard me say before that I think that that's why Dr. Ken Wapnick left us, that he left because you can't maintain that state. I mean, you can't, and it literally burns up the body. I mean, his body burned up in a certain sense. There was something that burned it up, right? And I've read this for you before, and I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just read a little piece of, this is from the Manual for Teachers on page 64. It's called, Can God Be Reached Directly? And the answer is yes, but to be able to sustain that awareness, right? Just read part of it. Sometimes a teacher of God may have a brief experience of direct union with God. In this world, it's almost impossible that this endure. I'll go ahead and read the rest of it. It can perhaps be won after much devotion and dedication. If there was anybody who was devoted and dedicated, it was Ken. He was completely devoted and committed to understanding this and to telling us what this said. Like no one. I knew him from 1975 until the time of his death, right? Total 100% commitment all the way, always just, and loving like no one you ever met, unless you got a chance to meet him, was able to love, right? It can be one after much devotion and dedication, maintained for much of the time on earth, but this is so rare, cannot be considered a realistic goal. If it happens, so be it. If it doesn't happen, so be it as well. All worldly states must be illusory. All worldly states. And sometimes the illusion becomes very dramatic and very big, and it doesn't look, there's nothing peaceful about it. You know, if you're living a life in nature and quiet, you know, maybe you see it with much greater ease, but we live in a 21st century where everything's on television and constantly in our face. So it's a very different situation. And then finally, this line. If God were reached directly in sustained awareness, the body would not be long maintained, which is exactly what Zhao is saying here. It burns up everything, including the body, right? So you can't hold it. So we keep coming back kind of into the body. We kind of concretize ourselves, you know, back into the body. But then, as the Course in Miracles tells us, this is an illusion as well. The body is an illusion. There's a very, very simple proof of the fact that the body's an illusion. They don't last. They all disappear, in case you haven't noticed, right? They all disappear. They've only got a little bit of time, and that's it. By the way, this is kind of an aside, but I heard this on Dr. Oz last night. I record Dr. Oz. I don't watch the whole thing, but I would watch the pieces of it that I want to watch. And I turned it on, and they were talking about the last 7 minutes of life with an expert who studies the last 7 minutes of life, right? And they told about a woman who was a nurse in a hospice center, and she did a study in this center, and she passed out a questionnaire to people who were dying. And one of the questions was, what do you regret about life, right? And there were two regrets that were primary. One was, I didn't love enough. Anybody able to identify, I didn't love enough, right? And number two was, I didn't fulfill what I came here to do. I didn't complete doing. And what we're all here to do, by the way, is to wake up. I mean, that's what we're doing here. We're all that's the. You may have an artistic way of doing that, or some way of doing that, but you know that was the other regret, that they hadn't really lived it out completely, that they'd run away from too many things and hidden their light under a bushel, you know, rather than letting it shine, as Jesus would say, out so that the world could see it. Very, very, very interesting process, right? So there's just so much here in Zhao's. Anybody want to ask Zhao a question about this? I might keep going, but I just thought, seeing we have just.
I have a question.
Okay, well, let's take him. Can you give her? Who's got the mic? You got to be on mic. Here, Zhao, give her. Let her the mic first.
Hi, thank you so much.
I don't think it's on. Got to be turned on. Sorry about it, but it's got to be on.
Hi. Okay, thank you so much. I just want to know, when you thought about killing yourself, did you try? Did you attempt the suicide?
Give her the mic. Give her the mic. Stand up, Zhao. I'm sorry, honey, but we're on camera.
I didn't really commit suicide, but I was going to.
So you didn't take anything?
Yeah, but almost.
But what's interesting, she had the realization. You know, once you get down to the point of recognizing that it's all for naught, and you're out of here. I'll tell another interesting story. A psychotherapist friend told me this story about. We'll ask you another question in a minute. She said that she had a client who was in biggie trouble with the IRS. And his marriage was totally shambles, deep in debt. Nothing was working. By the way, he was an undertaker. He owned a funeral parlor. He owned a McMansion, which was costing him a fortune, right? But because his social relationships were gone, everything was falling apart. He decided to kill himself. So he got a gun. And he sat down on the bed. You were on the bed. And he put the gun up to his head, and he thought, I'm going to be dead in just a minute. So before I die, let me just have this 1 minute of peace. Just 1 minute of emptiness. Wait a minute. He actually had a moment of peace. You know that insanity that can get into the mind, that stays in the mind, that doesn't want to leave the mind? The Course is trying to help us to get to places where we have these moments at least of peace, where you can see maybe something that's insane about your life, a relationship that isn't working or whatever else is going on. But if you can just set that aside for a little bit, then you know it's there. And that's what Zhao did. She realized, and this is interesting, one of the lines you said, the one thing you can't avoid is God. Right? I mean, the one thing you cannot run away from is God. So everything began to change at that point. Any other questions for Zhao while she's here? David, are you going to need a mic on this side of the room? All right, pass it on over to David.
You have here an awakening experience is experiencing the eternal oneness endlessly. Are you in that state forever, or do you kind of flip back into the world and flip back into that state?
Everybody is in that state forever. That's the truth. But after you got the taste of, but not everybody can aware the truth. That's why we are not tasting. Most of people are not tasting that state always. But after you got the awakening experience, you will know how to come back. You will never want to lose that.
I think the
But
best.
Well,
it's a
can
it's
you
a
get back?
constant peaceful
I'm sorry.
state in my heart.
Can you get back to that whenever you want to?
With my body, in my body, it's I cannot. I said in that article, when I experienced that the word and my body disappeared, and in my body I can receive the just live out of love, but it's not that absolute. I do connect it, but in your body you cannot be fully it. Can you understand?
That's why we're talking about the body burning up, right? So I think, a lot of people have mystical experiences. If you're lucky, you're going to have some mystical experiences in the course of your life journey process. What the mystical experience does, the Course all talks about is holy instances. These holy instances
That's
where
what I was going to ask. Is this akin to a holy instant?
it's akin to it, but it's a moment in which you see it all, and you get it and you understand it. The question is being able to hold it. Most all mystical experiences are transient. They do not last. You cannot really hold it. But as Zhao just said, one of the things that's you never forget it. You can never forget that the experience has happened and that it's possible to get it back again. It's possible to get it back again because you got there for a while. Actually, it's what she said to start with there was she says, everybody's there already. That's a very interesting line. So everybody's there already. So actually what happens when you get it or when you see it, it's like it is coming home. It's an experience of coming home. You're just going back to where the Course was, you've always been there. And now all you're doing is you're just recognizing it again. You're just seeing it again. And you know that that's home. And that all this other, what happens when you're having a dream at night? When you're having a dream at night, it seems like the events really are occurring, despite the fact that very often they're kind of some unfinished element, some nightmare thing that's going on within the context of the dream. But then you'd also, you can awaken from that. Sometimes you awaken to another kind of hell, but, but you awaken. But that's the good part. So what's wonderful about this and what's wonderful about what we're doing here is that we have a training program specifically designed to get us to the point where you do not lose it. I mean that it's less and less likely you can hold it. I want to talk more about this, but I want to see if there's any more questions for Zhao first before I do that. If there are, we can come back to them later, or maybe after the break. So let me talk about, thanks, hon. As I'm working on this book on mysticism and the Course in Miracles, I'm just working on a chapter this past week that's on living a contemplative life, right? A lot of the mystics talk about living a contemplative life. Let's talk about what that means. That means progressively going deeper and deeper and deeper, right? So that it's less and less likely that the world is going to be a big distraction for you. It's less and less likely that it stands a chance at taking your peace away from you. Because how can it take the peace away from you if you got the peace that's in there, right? It's a kind of cooking. Actually, let me tell you about an experience. Jeff attended a workshop I did last Saturday, and I talked about it there. It's about leading a contemplative life. Some of you know that I went to the New School for Social Research, which is literally 2 blocks from here, right? And I taught there for 10 years. And I taught courses on mystical philosophies there. One of the teachers who was there was Hannah Arendt. Does anybody know who Hannah Arendt was? They got 2 hands, right? 3 hands, or 4 hands, 5 hands. I see 6 in here. That's 6, okay. Well, Hannah Arendt was a German Jew who managed to, I won't tell the story, a movie was made about her life, which I haven't seen, but I understand that Jeff, it's called Hannah Arendt. That's the movie, right? So one of the things that she talked about was the difference between living a via contemplative, a contemplative life as a more active kind of cognitive life. There are kind of 2 extremes on that cognitive side. One is a very kind of neurotic life, and then another is also a very kind of scientific, analytical mind life. And then there's a third possibility, which is more this contemplative life. The mystic is really developing a contemplative life, where you allow your reading, your meditation, to just keep taking you deeper and deeper and deeper. We're going into a kind of insight that happens. It's a kind of, I like to think of it as a marinating or a cooking kind of thing that happens inside the mind. But as you, and that's what the lessons in the Course are trying to do too. They're trying to get you to be leading this kind of life where you're finding the gold and you're throwing away the junk. I mean, you're seeing what's valuable, and you're learning how to identify that. There's one of the Course lessons about that, about identifying what's valuable, and holding on to the, I'll call it gold at the moment. That's just a symbol, and you're throwing away the chaff, the junk, the excess, the stuff that's in the world. Because it's nothing about the world. It's all about what's inside you. Let's go on with these here. Did I finish that? A memory of home keeps haunting you as if there were a place that called you to return, although you do not recognize the voice, nor what it is the voice reminds you of, yet still you feel an alien here. It's just sort of underlining this whole idea, right? From somewhere all unknown. And that's because your real home is heaven. That's it. That's home. In the beginning of this book, Eternal Life and A Course in Miracles, my original title for the book was There's No Place Like Home. But my publishers wanted to get the Course in Miracles into the title, and the subtitle was Eternal Life in the Course in Miracles. So we changed the title to the subtitle so the word A Course in Miracles would appear on the title. I understood why they were doing it, right? And it was fine with me. So I made the first chapter is titled There's No Place Like Home. And I tell different, where is Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz? Well, answer. Huh? Well, she's home. She's in her bed, and she's sleeping, but she's had a concussion, and she's off in this crazy land, right? The world of Oz, where nice things are happening actually, and it's not a nightmare, but still the goal is to get home, and there is a wicked witch, and there is reasons to get out of there and to find help and to help her her partners her companions that she meets along the way achieve what they need to achieve too, wisdom, strength, whatever it is that they are. It's a great psychological piece, right? Where is Alice in Alice in Wonderland? She's also sleeping. She has her head on her sister's lap. She's sitting under a tree, and the last thing she sees before she closes her eyes is a rabbit going down the rabbit hole. And she just goes right down that rabbit hole and goes off into this incredible wonderland, which is a very weird, strange place where nothing seems to make, things are upside down and backwards. And the Course says that about this world. You know, that everything is upside down and back. We think that what's valuable and real is stuff that's on the outside. There's nothing of value out there. Nothing. There's no thing at all that has any value in it at all. Right? The only thing that's valuable is what's inside you, which is inside your mind. And I like to tell the story. I may have told this here before, but I'll tell this and then go on to the next piece here, is that I had 2 part-time jobs, which is not as good as having a regular job. But I was both a minister of a church in Brooklyn and teaching at the New School at the same time. And there was an older lady who was a member of my church named Mrs. Vosch, who I used to go see because she couldn't come to church because she was a shut-in. And on several occasions, this nurse called and said, "You better come over here. Mrs. Vosch is dying." I would go. Mrs. Vosch would not die. And so this happened like 6 times or something. And finally one day the nurse calls and said, "Look, I think she really is dying. You really should come over here." So I went, and she really was dying, you know. And the nurse and I are standing beside her bed. And I don't think this would have happened in the 21st century. This is about 1973 or something like that. I think the training of nurses is better, especially for hospice-type nurses, right? But Mrs. Vosch started saying, "I want to go." I started crying, "I want to go home. I want to go home." And this nurse said, "Nonsense, Mrs. Vosch, you are home." Meaning she was in her apartment in Brooklyn. But you know what she meant. I knew what she meant. She'd really had it. This body of hers was old, tired, sick, diseased. She wanted out of here, right? She really had it, right? Not only that, she'd gotten into a power struggle, a special relationship with this nurse. She had lost control in her own home, right? Somebody else was running the show. It wasn't her that was running the show. So I asked the nurse to leave the room. She did. I wouldn't have done that, I think, if I'd been a relative. But in this case, I thought it was the right thing to do. And she was just laying there, and she didn't say anything. And she opened her eyes, though. That was interesting. She opened her eyes. When the nurse walked out of the room, she opened her eyes. They had not been open. Suddenly, they were open. I thought, well, she knew that woman was out of the room, right? And she's just laying there with this help me look on her face. And I looked at Mrs. Vosch and I said, "Mrs. Vosch, you can go home whenever you want to." And she said, "Thank you." And she started to cry. Or at least a tear ran down her. She didn't cry, just tears. And she went home. She just closed her eyes and went home. Right? That's where we all want to go. I mean, we all want to be, but the Course is saying, look, you can be home here now, because it's what's going on in, home is in the mind. It's not in the world, and it's not in the body. So if you can get your mind home, then you can be home. And what home is really enlightenment. Home has really completed the process. Right? So we're all going to have these kinds of, well, not we're all, but a lot of us have these kinds of experiences, and then you practice to get back there. Right? Let's just do a little bit more, and then we'll take our break. Okay. Pardon? Oh, yeah, did I accident? This happened last time. Yep. Too many accidents, little things there, glitches here and there, right? Spirit gives life, and flesh counts for nothing. This is from the Gospel of John, all right? So what really is, let's talk for a second about what life is, right? Ken says, ultimately the goal of the Course is to understand you are not here. So the Course, this is not your real home. You do not really live here. Life is in the mind and of the mind. That's a direct quote from the Course in Miracles. Life is in the mind and of the mind, right? Going a little bit further. You will undertake a journey because you're not at home in this world. We're all like Alice in Wonderland, or like Dorothy and the Wizard. We're all on a journey. We're all looking to get back home again, right? And you will search for your home whether you realize it or not. If you believe outside of you, the search will be futile. Now, there was something in what you read, Zhao, that said that. But it's not out there, right? For you will be seeing it where it is, seeking it where it is not. And how many times we hear stories about people who make every effort to find it in the world, and they find something in the world, and it's just not it. I mean, it's not satisfying because it's empty. And what's a thing? What value is there in having an expensive car, for example, or whatever it is, right? Words can be helpful, particularly for the beginner, in helping concentrate and facilitate the exclusion, or at least the control of extraneous thoughts. That's what I mean, this contemplative process. Again, the Course says, watch your thoughts. Watch your thoughts. This is a mind training, so watch your insanity and realize you don't need it. You don't need the insane thoughts. You could see things differently. There's another way to see, and that's what we're talking about. Let us not forget, however, that words are but symbols of symbols twice removed from reality. So you can't really talk, that one of the main characteristics of a mystical experiences is called ineffability. You just can't, you can try, we can get reports like what Zhao's experience was, and that is really, really good because it really provides some real insights, some real clear doors and windows have opened up, some fresh breeze has come in, and you're able to see. By the way, the Holy Spirit is often described as blowing wind, breath, air. What do we say when somebody dies? They have expired the last breath. There's a sense of it from the first inhalation to the last exhalation, right? There's a direct connection between spirit and breath, right? But what's also interesting about that is the breath is invisible, right? It doesn't have a form, not really. I mean, we could say there's molecules and stuff there, but it doesn't have a visible, there's not a visible form, and yet without it you can't live, even for a couple minutes, right? And just one or two more. In these instances of release from physical restriction, you experience much of what happens in the holy instant. You were asking about the holy, this is a holy instant, right? The lifting of the barriers of time and space, the sudden experience of peace and joy that's in, right? What is Zhao describing? She's this incredible experience of peace and joy, And above all, the lack of awareness of the body. Because the body is heavy. I don't care how light it is, it's still heavy. You got to take care of this darn thing, right? And of the questioning of whether or not all of this is possible. The body is a symbol of what you think you are. It is clearly a separation device and therefore does not exist. It's very clearly a separation device. These bodies, and there's a line in the Course that says, minds can join. This is a very important point. Minds can join, bodies cannot. The good thing is to know that minds can join. And we especially know that when we're loving. The experience of love, because in the experience of love, you're not experiencing separation and division. You're actually joining in the sense that you want to be one, right? You want to be connected in that way, but you can only connect through love. You can't connect through separation, through projection, through an interpretation. One more and then we'll quit and take our break. The light of truth is in us, where it was placed by God. It is the body that's outside us. And it is not our concern to be without a body, is to be in our natural state. So that's why it makes this whole thing unnatural. The whole world is unnatural in that sense. The whole body thing is an unnatural in that sense, right? So, first of all, I can't tell you how many times the Course emphasizes there's really nothing to be afraid of. What are you afraid? You're going to lose your body? Big deal, right? I mean, really, big deal. I mean, that's like the fear that we have. The biggest fear is that we're going to lose this thing, and yet this thing is a weight that's holding you down all the time. That's when you read the near-death experience reports, and they're all blissful because, first of all, they're not holding on to, and it's not just the body, but in Zhao's term too, Hun, you had something here about the concept. I mean, it's not just the body, it's the idea of you. But that's a big subject. Let's take a break and we'll come back and talk about that later. Okay.